Well, we're here today online, and we're having the opportunity to have a chat with Sarah Martin. Sarah is the Foundation Principal of Stonefields School in Auckland in New Zealand. And again, it's an amazing opportunity when we think about it to be able to sit back in our respective houses across the world and with our tech support team and others in Europe, Sarah in Auckland and myself in Sydney, and to have this conversation. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sarah, your role as a school principal has been an interesting one for you in the last decade, because you had the opportunity of establishing a different pedagogic model in a school that the New Zealand government was establishing with quite a different physical design. Can you just give us a bit of an update on Stonefields School and what it normally looks like when it's not in a remote mode?
The Stonefields School is made up of a series of what we call learning hubs, where there's around 3 teachers and up to around 75 learners within one of those hubs. And they're quite deliberately multi-year leveled across the school. So currently we've got a roll of around 700 learners, but started with that 100 learners and are continuing to grow and evolve.
And the age range for the people at the school, for the children, for the learners?
Children start when they turn 5, and then they go all the way up to what we call year 8, and so they're leaving us when they're turning about 13.
Going through, so that's probably in some other countries that might be the equivalent of primary and middle school, sort of taking up that sort of age spectrum. Yeah. Okay, so a school
called a full primary in New Zealand.
Yes, yeah. So a very interesting background then. So a school community that's grown in a different pedagogic model and suddenly thrown into remote learning, as with so many others around the world. Can you just describe again for us, what was the time frame that you and the staff had to think through the different models that you might try and create online?
Yeah, it happened really quickly. So we had 48 hours until the school was to close. We had an announcement. We were sitting there on Monday afternoon, and they gave us till the Wednesday at midnight. So what an amazing team and collaboration, really, and how people pulled together to make sure our most vulnerable families had resources. Anybody without a device could loan one from the school. We wanted as much as possible to give out some physical resource packs, because although we really value online and digital learning, we want that real balance, particularly for our 5 to 7-year-olds. The learning design and what we've been thinking for them is quite different to the children that are, say, 7, 8, and going up to 13 years. So we spent a lot of time just before the school was locked down thinking about what our philosophy would be for this. We're calling it distance learning. And that's where lots of robust debate occurred, which was a really neat collaborative dialogue to be having, which really landed on, we wanted our children to have the opportunity to keep those relationships and connections with their teacher. So there needed to be some kind of face-to-face, and we're using Google Hangouts for that. Children's learning's pushed to them in an app called School Talk that we've been developing for the last 4 years. So they're very familiar with opening up the app, seeing what their learning design is. So we felt that lots of choice that learners could still opt into in that forum was important. But importantly, the other sort of third, so we're talking about 3/3, is where our learners can really have that, test out that agency and have that choice, and are open to a whole lot of other opportunities that they can just run with. So a third, sort of the teacher workshop idea, a third of it is student-led choice, but it will be learning on progressions that they're familiar with and they may want to pursue next steps. And that final third being, what are those other wonderful learning opportunities? Learning to code, it might be that they might want to, they're into building an aeroplane, or they have passion. So our passion-led learning, like breakthrough, would very much be pursued in that third and that idea. Thinking in thirds, we're not thinking about a 6-hour school day. And I think it's important to mention that every family situation in this lockdown will be different. For some, they'll have preschoolers at home, they'll have school-age children, and both parents will be working. For others, they may just found out they're out of work because of the situation with the lockdown. So lots and lots of stress in that family. So I think it's really up to the child and the family to be engaging in as much of that learning that's provided as they choose, and that's okay. An hour a day for some children might be success, whereas what might look like more of a usual day, school day, might be success for other families, because their reality is that we're both needing to work from home. But I don't think parents should feel guilty. I think they'll consume and engage at the level that they can, and that there's no right or wrong way. Importantly, parents need to remember they're the first child, they're the first teacher of their child. They're the ones who know their children inside and out, and will know if a child's experiencing a whole lot of anxiety, that actually cuddling up with mum and reading a book or doing what's needed in that moment's more important.
You've raised a number of very interesting points there, really, really helpful, so thank you. I know that there are some governments and education systems around the world who have sort of set the message that it's critical that learning continues for the same number of hours or the same topics as has been experienced in that face-to-face environment, and that is causing a level of anxiety and stress for parents. Now, you've talked about the fact that really parents should feel free to adjust whatever is being provided for them from a school, so that it works around their family routines. I guess I'd like to go a bit further into that one, and to help parents be freed from any anxiety that there's going to be long-term damage for their child's learning as a result of what's happening for these few months.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting actually working in a household where, to start the day, for it to be successful, I've needed to engage with my partner and say, when are your big meetings and conversations, and how's that looking for you today? And when his daughter will be here next week, that will be another variable, and that will probably start the day by saying, hey, what are we all up to today, and how are we going to make that work? And that will need to be really, really flexible as to where the learning might happen for different people or not, and when there's time to just play. I think our kids need that time just to be kids and to have fun, and that will stimulate some curiosity, and some other and further learning will continue as a result.
Okay, yeah, that's I think an important point, isn't it? Around the family meal table, or whether the kids are playing with their Lego or whatever else they're doing, that's just as important in terms of that learning opportunity, especially for the younger kids when we're talking about that. You've also used the interesting phrase distance learning, and we've been using the phrase remote learning as well, as opposed to online. It does suggest that it's a slightly wider concept than just straight online learning. Do you want to sort of talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think in this lockdown situation, the situation many countries find themselves in, is that you will be receiving the learning online, because that is the way in which it's going to be distributed, but that doesn't mean that all the learning happens, and we would be very much advocating for a balance of on and offline learning. So that, I think that's the opportunity to really stimulate creativity is important. It's interesting, the more I reflect on this, I think the more important in a primary school context is teachers, there's a shift in how they design the learning for a distance learning approach, and that those good instructions and supports and tips for parents, I think, are going to be really helpful to set that learning up for success. because I think teachers need to be reflecting too that the audience now is the child and the family or the parents who will be engaging, depending on the age of their children. So when I think about our 8-year-old learners who are incredibly savvy at knowing where they are in their learning and what's next, we know because of how they're emailing us and engaging with us, even though they're working from a distance, that that learning is continuing and that they have that capability to be able to drive their learning. So it's about putting really good, rich learning opportunities and quests and opportunities that promote thinking, that I think how we're designing for that is a little bit different in this distance learning approach.
Okay, so again, some interesting points which I'd like to sort of pick up on in terms of what you're saying. I know that keeping parents informed about the pedagogic directions and how learning sort of is happening within a school community in a normal context is really, really important. But what sort of strategies have you thought through in relation to how do we keep parents informed during this time?
So the communication's been critical, and we've provided lots and lots of communication and outlined our philosophy for distance learning. So we have used the third concept and talked about what parents can expect, and that their children, they can expect for their children to be involved in some workshops in, say, the morning part of their day, and from the next sort of third, they know that there's going to be learning there that meets children's needs and is focused on their next learning steps, because that's how our whole pedagogy works. This is not different to how we continue, whether we're physical or not, whether or not the children uptakes, that's the question to be asked. And then the third, we've really pitched that in our communications with parents around it being a real family opportunity to further engage in a blog of all these resources we're curating that we're wanting to make online and public so anybody can access. So that's just growing, and it comes under headings around what is this, how might your child engage in it, and what are some tips for parents. So that's the way in which we're framing it. So I think the ongoing communications have been critical, and through our app, and we have a Facebook page where we've put little video clips that we think are fantastic, like Nathan McCarty-Wallace, and his messages are wonderful around actually great opportunity now for kids to be learning really good life skills. Can they make their own bed and do those sorts of things? So really reassuring our parents. And I think the other thing that we're building at the moment is just a site that's curating all the communications and how we can quickly access these resource sites. And the other piece is around building digital savviness for our parents if they're unsure how Google Hangout works, as an example, so that there's some tech workshops being offered where parents can opt into, and that can be supported in that way too.
Okay, lots of great ideas there. So thank you. Just a couple of other areas that just sort of to finish off with. We know that when the kids come back, the one thing that they will probably jump at will be the connection with their friends. That they're missing, I guess, two things in my understanding. They're seeing their friends every day and also being outdoors. What sort of strategies can we bring in at this time to ensure kids are still feeling that social connection, even when they're in a distance learning mode?
So I think, again, coming back to some of the design of the other opportunities that we're working on, is how are some of those collaborative opportunities so that learners are encouraged to, for example, one of the opportunities that's been designed is around your hidden musical talents, and how might you get together with some family members or some of your friends and be able to produce something that's going forward for the Stonefields Got Talent showcase. So I think, again, these children are naturally, even when they're going home from school, are getting online and they're collaborating with their peers to do their learning. So shared docs, presentations, ways that people are contributing to these outputs around the learning, I think is a natural way of and that's the way of the world, isn't it? In the future, the workplace wants people who are great collaborators, and I think we need to intentionally design that into what we're wanting kids to engage in.
Okay, yeah, okay. And again, you've sort of touched on what I'd love to finish with. If Sarah had her freedom to do anything online or suggest things for distance learning, what would be the craziest creativity that you would actually like to throw out there for the distance learning environment? What are some of the creative possibilities that we haven't really thought through?
Yeah, it's really fun, and isn't it funny? Because the teacher part in me is certainly coming to the fore in thinking about how we do engage our learners. I think more than ever, the designing rich, real opportunities and how they're presented to learners and whether they uptake them or not. So at the moment, we're actually curating 2 channels in a blog because we find that's a really good way to be able to tag items. So if you're looking at something that's musical and it's for these particular years, you can quickly find other learning opportunities to stimulate families if they're wanting extra ideas. So I don't think we've been particularly good at sharing and curating resource across schools. So my big goal would be, how do we pull together and curate these really deep and meaningful learning opportunities that anyone can access, actually. I think that we could take that way further than we currently are. I know that in school talk and in our cluster, lots of schools are using it now, and how we're leveraging the design of one another so that we can add to it and change it. And I think there's a lot that could be done around teacher efficiency. I think there's a whole lot of people recreating what's already out there, and how do we get much smarter in that space? So I think there's definitely, through the digital affordances, some efficiencies that could improve. Yeah. And then I think, can I say one last thing, Stephen? I think
yes.
I think that the area I'm most passionate about would be what learning really, really matters, and what are we learning from this situation about what really matters. And if this is the stuff that we then believe is so important it can't be left to chance, how might it be used as the basis to show shift and growth in our learners, and to totally transform and turn upside down the way that traditional assessments are carried out in most schools? So I think there's a real opportunity to come back to kids curating rich records of artifacts in their learning that can be portrayed to multiple different audiences, to ensure that they're successful in their learning pathway way beyond primary school, secondary school and beyond. So yeah, this could be our opportunity to really make that happen.
Okay, that's a great point to finish on, because I think there are people already thinking about, well, what happens after? And I think that opportunity is really, really important, that we think about how do we help almost hold the hands of educators who are frightened about that shift as well, because they haven't really experienced it or had the opportunity to think it through. So that's a great point for us to finish up on. So thank you so much for your time today and for your wisdom. And I know that many people will find what you've said very, very encouraging and help them think through how they might think about structuring their days.